Welcome, everyone. My name is Caitlin Cameron, and I am the project director for Thrive, which is the education and outreach arm of Ecovillage at Ithaca. Ecovillage at Ithaca has been around for 30 plus years. We were founded in 1991, with the first neighborhood being built in the mid-90s. The second neighborhood being built in the mid-2000s, and our third neighborhood was built in the mid-teens. So we have 3 neighborhoods, 100 households, approximately 250 residents. We are primarily a residential community, and we're in Ithaca, New York, which is the Finger Lakes region. Another notable thing here is Cornell University is a big presence here. And because our community has been around for so long, we get a lot of interest in people wanting to visit us, wanting to learn from us, wanting to potentially live here. So all of that's welcome. And I, as we get into the Q&A section, we'll hear more from all of you about what your interests are, what you're hoping to learn. Whether it's specifically about Ecovillage at Ithaca or co-housing and eco-villages in general. Just a tidbit about me. So I went to Cornell for undergraduate, for my undergraduate degree, and that's how I first came to live in Ithaca. Moved away for many years and decided that I wanted to live in community. I knew that I liked Ithaca, and I knew about Ecovillage at Ithaca. I had taken a tour about 5-6 years ago. So I began the prospective resident process about a year ago to move here. And during that time, the position that I hold now became available. So I applied for that position and got it. And that sort of sped up my process for moving here. I'm the only employee of Ecovillage. Everything else functions by residents volunteering their time to make things happen, whether that's governance, whether that's maintenance, whether that's landscape, whether that's cooking for community meals. All of that's happening through our volunteer service. And so I came in as a renter, and so I can speak to being a new resident, I can speak to being a renter, I can speak to being a person in my 40s, being single. So I don't have the perspective of having a family here. Another thing I can speak to is transportation. I choose to live without a car. So those are some of the things that I have, I guess, particular expertise in. But today we're also focusing on the idea of conscious communication. And I will say, when we get to question and answer, all questions are welcome. It doesn't just have to be about communication, but we like to put a little highlight and focus on a particular topic each time, and have guest speakers. So that brings me to Corirose, who is here with me as a fellow Ecovillage resident, but also here to talk about conscious communication. Do you want to introduce yourself, Corirose,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
get
Thanks
into
so
it?
much. Thanks so much, Caitlin. And just to say, I saw Pat and Mark, who also live here, just smiling while Caitlin was talking, because we're so grateful that Caitlin is now hosting us right for this connection, and just all of your work with Thrive is just excellent. So yeah, my name's Corirose, and I moved here in 2019. So I had about 8 months before the pandemic started, and which is really significant in terms of understanding how this culture functioned pre-pandemic, and then how we've done our best to innovate and adapt and be resilient through these pandemic years. One of my biggest passions and lifelong dreams was to live in more intentional community. I lived in several shared households in different places in the country. I was based in St. Louis, Missouri for most of the last 20 years before moving here, from Michigan originally, and had checked out co-housing in different places, but was just a dream come true to come in and be a shareholder here and have a home. I'm living right now in Tree, the third neighborhood that Caitlin mentioned. And personally, my deepest passion and work in the world is to support people in listening and speaking to each other. And really, I call myself a connection activist because it seems like that's what everything comes down to. All the things that have meaning to me and all people's values, all the different things that are so important and vital to this time on Earth really come down to our ability to connect to ourselves and each other. So I see somebody else is coming in. Welcome. So my background for many years has been primarily in nonviolent communication, but we're taking this out a little broader and calling it conscious communication because we really want to include all modalities that help people just find ways to really communicate what matters to us and also really be in care of each other so that it really is possible to be authentic and real, express our needs, and be kind and compassionate towards others. That's what we're calling conscious communication. So I'd love to gather us for a minute, especially since some people were just coming in. Then I'll give an overview of what I'm going to kind of hit in my presentation for probably about 20 minutes, and then leave plenty of time for all of our questions. In terms of community and communication, it's like so powerful to think about all the dimensions of our lives here and how communication is so vital. But I'd like to talk a little bit about just what it's like living in intentional community, living in an eco-village this size. Talk a little bit more about what conscious communication is, how we're defining that. Look together at what the key elements are of living interdependently this way, and how communication really is vital in each of those elements. Welcome, who's ever coming in. Just giving an overview of what I'm going to be talking about before we get to our questions and answers. I'd like to share just a little bit from my background in communication and talk about the lens of nonviolent communication, also known as NVC, or compassionate communication, and how we see this bedrock of our shared humanity, like what the shared needs are or shared values are of all people. And then I would like to talk a little bit about the unique relationship that we have connecting in a village this size, what it's like living in a village this size, all the ways that we relate to folks. And lastly, a little bit about conflict resolution and how that's been evolving for us, especially in the last few years, the team that's emerged here. So firstly, I don't know if you've ever visited the Ecovillage or maybe another large co-housing or intentional community, but when I look around, walk through the neighborhoods, look at all the buildings, the common houses, what I see are thousands and thousands of hours of collaboration and shared decision making. You know, it's true of anything that's growing and thriving in this world, all organizations and ways that people live, but to know that this was done collectively, you know, from the beginning, and what it takes for all of those hours. So given that we all have this unique backgrounds and perspectives, our own diverse ways of processing information, our own different diversity of our interiors, our inner world, I just want to acknowledge what a miracle it is that people with different backgrounds learn to listen to each other, you know, represent their values and needs, dialogue, and make these kinds of shared decisions with each other. I see Pat and Mark smiling, and maybe some of you have worked cooperatively in different ways or had to collaborate in different working teams. It's quite amazing just to step back a minute and think about, like, how does this happen? You know, how do people really have that give and take of communication? So let's define conscious communication a little bit. The founding members here came in with a shared toolkit around that. That's my understanding from talking to Liz Walker and some of the people who were first coming together and helped build the first neighborhood, which is called Frog. They had been practicing something called co-counseling, also known as reevaluation counseling, which just involves people really deeply listening to each other, really holding space for each other and really listening, having that sort of deep curiosity and openness to really hearing what matters to each other. I think some of them had studied NVC and some other different modalities of communication. So they had a shared toolkit. And through the years and all that it's taken to develop these neighborhoods, we have a lot of new residents. We have a lot of folks who have, maybe never had a background in something that had them at least, actually studying or learning some concrete communication skills. So that's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm going to start offering some classes and some opportunities to engage in even just dialogues about what empathy is, what active listening is, so that we start to have a shared toolkit again. But what I wanted to say about conscious communication, we're using that term just so that we can be very inclusive to all kinds of models and ways that people have of sharing communication skills. And I think of conscious communication as just anything that gets us actually aware of how we are sharing thoughts, feelings, and ideas that leads to a mutual understanding between people, that helps us express what's really important to us, and at the same time really be holding other people in care. And I think I said that earlier. It's something that I'm focused on a lot when I think about how communication works in community. Is you want a way to be authentic and in your own discovery of yourself, your needs, as they're dynamically kind of happening in this kind of shared interdependent living, and also be kind to others, be able to really be compassionate. And that sounds like, certainly it's a beautiful aspiration and a pretty normal intention for folks that care about living in community with each other. But there's a lot of skill involved, especially when things are heated, especially when people are touched with something that brings up issues of trust or connection for them. So I personally just want to say, respectfully, that I believe that these are learnable skills, and that there are really some key tools that really help people to communicate with each other. And that not only is it valuable to study and practice, but to actually have a way that we have like even whether it's informal or formal, like a practice group where we really talk about our dynamics of communication and review that, and just have more of a shared reality around those building blocks that help us in that ongoing dialogue and connection that's so vital, really, in every dimension of our lives here. I really enjoyed thinking about what I would share today, because it got me thinking about like kind of what are the key elements of living in intentional community that are so dependent on our communication with one another. And this is what I came up with, evolving. The first is a sincere desire for connectedness with our neighbors. It really is about care and wanting to enrich and contribute to each other's lives. That is so much the fabric of what co-housing and all intentional community is about. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second would be the capacity to be open to respecting differences with other people. We have so many, not only different backgrounds and styles of relating, but actually different needs for connection that we bring to this sort of living interdependently. So being able to self-identify, really be more in touch with what is your individual needs are, styles, desires, even if they're dynamic, and then having the curiosity to really discover what that's about for other people. That's what I mean by this being the second ingredient of this openness and respect for differences in folks. And the third is, I see, is a willingness to grow, a willingness to have growing edges with things that are maybe really gifts of yours, talents, things that are strengths, you have a lot of practice or experience yet, and the other dimensions that you may not have much experience with, or may even be like a deficit, something that ways that communication wasn't shared in our families of origin, or maybe a very different style of communication and leadership that has been a part of your life through your working life. Some of that can be challenging to suddenly come into a relationship that is going to be based on mutual valuing of everyone's opinion and especially shared decision making. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about each of those in relationship to communication. And the first one being this desire to really have contribution and connectedness with our neighbors. The things that come up immediately for me with that is that we're always going to be making requests of others and receiving in. We're going to be in this cycle of giving and receiving. And I think of request making as just like an absolute art. That people do get better at living in an intentional community like this. One of the phrases we use here a lot is thanks for considering. So how I define a request and the difference between a request or a demand is that it's really okay to get a no. And so I can have sophisticated wording, but if I'm not going to be okay with somebody not saying yes to what I'm requesting of them, then there's something going on that I need to check out there. So requests, when we're making requests, we're willing to hear a no. We don't know who might be available to meet that request, and we want to be specific and doable and positively framed. So it can be from the mundane kinds of things that are happening right as we speak. I just was looking at the email before I got on the call, and people were asking for a ride downtown or for help picking up something from the store. That's the kind of thing that happens a lot in this interdependent living with each other. And so those are all pretty easy to frame in a positive and what you're asking for and to put it out there and see who's available. But when it comes to support in times of need or emotional support or care of some kind, I don't know about, I think most people, myself included, it can really bring up a lot to really ask people for what we need. So getting skillful at request making and having a growing edge around how you receive it, not just contributing to others, but actually letting people contribute to our lives is one of the things that's really helpful to this whole community reality and value of contributing and connecting to our neighbors. So openness and respect for differences. I think the biggest thing about that and communication is really thinking about both how we express ourselves to others and how we hear others. And one of the beautiful communication keys that is very helpful to that, a lot of communication models talk about trying to listen to the feelings that are underneath what people are reporting, what was actually going on for them emotionally. And I would like to share something that I really appreciate about the philosophy of nonviolent communication. And that is that there's a linking between what we feel, emotions that are arising for us on any given topic or situation, and our deeper values, what really matters to us, what's important to us. And the philosophy is to say that when it comes right down to it, all people are seeking the same things. We do an exercise, and we can do it for just a brief moment here together. If you haven't experienced this before, if you just stop and take a moment and really think about, what do you think of as the good life? What is it that you're seeking, especially if you're thinking about living in intentional community? There might be some ways you want that to enrich your life, you want to contribute. And under those ways that would be expressed, what are the deeper values? What are the core needs? What's important to you in all of that? Some other words that I use, sometimes the word need can throw people off a little bit. what you hope for, what you're nourished by, what you long for, things that you treasure. What would it be that is that would really enrich your life, and what do you care about the most? And think of those qualities for a moment. And what's fascinating about this, well, if we were together in more of an experiential workshop setting right now, we could take turns yelling out what all these, speaking to what all these qualities were, write them down, and maybe you can even put a couple in the chat so we can validate this if that's not distracting. And what is fascinating is people all over the world, every culture, all ages, whether you're in a prison or you're a kid in a high school, a young person in a high school, or like us living in an intentional community, we have these same longings, these same core values. I think we won't get too lost in the chat. So let me just name, a few of them: for autonomy, for playfulness, for contribution as a need. I'll just think of the ones that are really right here. For freedom, for the capacity to have care, to give and receive care, for peace of heart and mind, to be able to be authentic. So all of those shared needs that are universal, when we start to think about those as a bedrock of our shared humanity, and so that when we're dialoguing with people, that we're actually not just listening to what they're saying on the surface, what their interest is, but what their underlying values are that are linking, that are behind what they're maybe asking for or bringing forward in a decision that they're making. So that's one of the keys that I would really like you to have from today, if that isn't something that's already in your awareness, that the more that we listen to people for what they're feeling, yes, and then tune into this deeper link between what's important to us, what really matters to us, that is a way that we're going to connect with each other and find ways that we can use that common ground. I'll say one more thing about the whole issue, philosophy and understanding that we have these shared universal needs, is that we don't struggle on that level. What we struggle is in the ways that we come up with to meet those needs. And we can call those our strategies. So we might get together and we start to talk about something that we want to do in the neighborhood where I live. And we have several ideas about how to go about it, like building a pavilion where we can gather outside 3-season. That's been a need that's really been up, especially during the pandemic. And if we just start saying where we think it ought to be and what materials we want to use, and the pavilion I've always been dreaming of and what it looks like, or how we would expand it in the future, we have a lot of different ideas to sort through together. And some of them touch some of the neighbors, and we think, oh God, I don't want the pavilion like right in the middle of the courtyard because I'm sound sensitive, or different things. But what we've learned to do in the way that we go about projects together and form working teams together is we start with what are the values, what are the underlying needs that we really want to meet. And then when we have all of those on the table and we can feel what's important to everybody, then it's a lot easier to start to really vision about the concrete plans of what we want to do. How am I doing time-wise? Okay, I wanted to say one more thing that for those of you that may have a background in some form of communication, I meant to ask when we were first together to see who's kind of in the room that has studied some forms of communication. Something that comes up, especially in this important time when we're so aware of equity issues in general, is that if we want to say a philosophy about these universal needs, is that everyone's needs matter. Everyone's needs might not get met, in every decision or project that happens, but their needs matter. We also want to say that we realize that it's not an equal playing field, that everyone's needs do matter, but how we actually have access to that, how we perceive each other, all of the internalized biases we have. I just want to, say briefly that to me, conscious communication has to center on inclusivity, and that's always a growing edge for us. It is for us here, even though we don't have a whole lot of diversity in terms of ethnic or racial diversity. We do have, different backgrounds and socioeconomic diversity here. And I see people always being really aware that when we come to policy and creating projects here, that we keep in mind that we have to make space in the room and in the dialogue and in the conversations for people, even just because they're more introverted, who may not be getting their voice in as easily unless we really hold that in our awareness and help people get their voices in. Let's see where I was going next. I wanted to talk just briefly about the unique relationship of living in a village this size. Because in most of life, we have these levels of relating that are going on. A lot of it's superficial. Think of more of like just informational is a good way to say it. How's the weather? How are you, what are you doing today? Where are you on your way to? That kind of level. And then a more relational level would be, sharing things that are meaningful, how you're actually feeling. It can include emotional content and, just something that's important to us at any given moment. And maybe a third layer of relating that's more intimate, that happens more between people who have deeper connection, is to actually talk transparently in the moment about things that are arising, or what's coming up, especially if things are heated or something that's challenging, to be able to have the kind of communication level where you can talk about difficult internal challenges as they're arising. So living in community, living in a village, walking around here all the time, and really people of, even though there are some folks that are a little more limited in their physical capacities, everyone here is always moving all around the village as soon as because we are walking to get to our cars, we're walking to go to a common house, to join meetings, to take out our compost. And as we meet each other and engage each other on these paths, I learned in my first few months here, there's sort of a language that we tend to learn. Some of it's overt, some of it's a little bit body language of who has a moment to stop and talk, or who might, be on their way to an appointment of some kind. But it's a pretty organic thing that people feel out. And so a lot of communication does happen very spontaneously, just in passing each other in community. And what is so unique and enriching about that is I have caring relationships with people who I've really never sat down and had a conversation with. So there becomes sort of a circle of intimacy for most people that live in community. Folks who are your own family or households or closest friends here, people who you collaborate with and work with in different projects or teams within the village. And then, just all your neighbors, some who you might not know well. So it's one of the things I cherish most about living here, is that I feel like I have all these enriching, connecting experiences without a level of intimacy that would take too much time and just not be feasible. So I feel like held in a community of care, even beyond my most intimate circle. And how are we doing for time, Caitlin? Should we be moving towards our
I
question
think
and answer?
I think we should move towards question and answer if
Okay.
you are getting towards being complete.
Yeah. I'll just say the last thing, really briefly. I didn't really speak about specific communication skills, because I think most of us kind of understand active listening and some basic things about using I statements that are just helpful to people hearing each other. But I did mention that we have a conflict transformation team here. That's what we call it, conflict transformation. And that we started it a few years ago. We use circle process, which is a very ancient way of sitting in a circle together and using some sort of object to pass around to really hold space to listen to people one at a time. And we find that extremely helpful. We do it both for just community building to find out more about each other and also in times of struggle or conflict. So I'll stop there so we can take your questions.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity. So my question is, I actually have two questions. The one is the private property. From one hand, I understand if we give out private property and we get a terrible nut or whatever the saying is, then how do we get him out of the community? Well, so I understand that. But on the other hand, I know you guys don't have private property. So how's that being like to just invest, however much money to secure your place, that's your home, and knowing that nobody's going to kick you out? Obviously, unless you just absolutely go like sideways with drugs and so on. So that's the one main question. And then maybe I should ask the second one now, or should we just do rounds and then come back?
I think we do one. Tell me your name.
Alosha.
Alosha, let me see if I heard your question so we can help unpack what you're asking. I heard a couple of things. You're kind of wondering about how we live here in this particular community, because it might be different from community to community in terms of ownership of our own private property, something about having, being shareholders or living on the land, or what is held in common versus what is held in private. And then I heard you specifically asking, like, what do you do if you have somebody living here who may be, really challenging to live with? I think that's what you mean by, a nutcase, like somebody who maybe doesn't have an easy time.
I was kind of answering my own understanding why private property is dangerous, because if you get a terrible person and he's put down the money and that's his land and his home, you cannot get him out. So I was kind of answering that part myself. So I understand that. But still, how does it work in terms of, yes, if you could just explain more about ownership and how do people, buy in without actually owning a piece of paper that home is yours?
Okay. So it's a pretty basic question about just understanding shared resources and private resources when you live in an intentional community. Is that it, Alosha, that you want to understand the basic dynamic there? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So your home is yours?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So the land is held collectively. Part of it is owned by the Ecovillage itself, and part of it is in a land trust. Mm-hmm. And people have their own individual homes, and they can be shareholders, having purchased those shares, or renters. And it is true what you were saying, though, that anyone can move to Ecovillage. We have a membership process, and the key there is just to really help people have a sense of what it's actually like to live interdependently, to being asked to contribute, so to actually have an informed feel for what it's like to not just be living in a private house in a suburb or in a city where you don't have to necessarily have a relationship with your neighbors, that you are going to be in relationship with your neighbors, you are going to be making shared decisions. So our membership process is really our key to helping orient people. And it is true that sometimes people move here that are challenged. There are cultural norms here that really hold a lot of diversity, that make space for different backgrounds and different styles of communicating. They stretch sometimes with challenging situations or issues, but basically people who have a hard time living interdependently, from what I know, maybe somebody who's been here longer could also speak to it, usually end up leaving, because folks that are going to be successful here really do learn to have a lot of respect of differences. I'm not sure if that totally answered what you were asking, Alosha, but maybe it gave you a general feel for like the vulnerability of being open to everybody and living interdependently. Pat, you got something to add?
So basically nobody can get kicked out of their home because their home is their kind of nest. Is that correct? Or they can get kicked out of their home if they don't
Okay.
abide to communal rules and have dinners on Tuesdays or whatever communal things that
So
people have to do together.
there are different models of community, and we're a co-housing community, which means each household has their own home. They're shareholders in a cooperative, so each of the 3 neighborhoods is a cooperative. So there have been instances where based on legal grounds or based on agreements that you sign on to becoming a shareholder, those are the bases on which we can move towards having someone leave. That's pretty rare that happens. And as Corirose was saying, it tends to be a more self-selective process where people realize it's not a good fit for them or something like that. But it's different from like co-living or communal living. And, you know, so it's people have a little bit more space. There's kind of a mix of private space and public space. And people engage with that at different levels. But we also don't vote people in. So this is not a community where we choose people based on their personality or their, you know, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Subjective things. It is a self-selecting situation. I think we'll see if anyone else has a question. I see Janie. Do you want to go ahead?
You just need to unmute.
There you go.
There you go.
Thank you. You would think at this point we would all know how to use it, but I was struggling. I have a question about the timeline. Caitlin, you were saying that you'd been in process for about a year and then wound up taking the Thrive position. And so that sped it up a little bit. I have been in communication with a person at the Ecovillage who has a potential place for rent sometime this summer. Is that a little bit unreasonable to expect that I might be able to move through the process of that is in place to be able to move there in that short of a length of time? Is that unreasonable?
I can start to answer that, and if anyone has more to add. So it's not unreasonable. I think the important thing to know about our process is that we do have, if you go to the Ecovillage Ithaca website, we have a Living Here section. And that's where you find the information about our membership process and the different steps that we have. And so it is easier to get a rental or buy a home, buy shares in a home, if you've completed that process. And so it's not necessarily that the process itself takes a long time. It kind of depends on how much time you have to give to the process. A lot of the things on that list can be done remotely. Attending meetings, having a conversation with membership people about what it's like to live here, so there are some events that are often offered online, but there is also a requirement to come here in person. And so there have been a couple instances like myself where that 5-day residency requirement was fulfilled in my first 30 days of living here as a renter. But I think the important thing to know is that people can live at Ecovillage for up to 30 days without a lease or without owning. But after that 30 days, you have to have met the membership requirements and either have a lease as a renter or have gone through the process of buying a home, and those are approved by the neighborhood board. So sometimes you can find out about home sales sooner if you are here already living. So that's my situation. I'm currently a renter, but because I already am a member of Ecovillage and I'm here in person, you find out about home sales before they're publicly listed. So that also kind of can help your chances of securing a space here. And if you've gone through the membership process, that makes it easier also to buy a home, because you have to have completed all those things before closing. So I'll stop there. I don't know if does that answer your question, do you think? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
it does. And I guess also I'm wondering, I imagine because y'all are an older, very established co-housing community, that you probably have a lot of folks who want to be part of it. So I guess what I'm wondering is, like, is there already a list of, hundreds of people who are waiting to rent or buy in or that sort of thing? I'm just kind of trying to.
Yes, we have a lot of interest, and I would say there are hundreds of people who have started or gone through the membership process, but it's not a first come, first served situation. So it really depends on, are you ready to move? Is the timing right? There are different factors at play. Are you a good fit for the person you're renting from? Those kinds of things can also be a factor. So it's not necessarily like, oh, you're like number 200 in a list. But yes, there is a lot of interest. So that does mean it can be more competitive. But it's another thing for folks to be aware of. If you are interested in living in our community, there's a rentals and sales page on our website. And I recommend that you check that often, maybe once a week, to just be aware of what's coming up, what's available, because that does change fairly often.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Are there other questions? This Q&A sessions happen monthly on the first Wednesday of the month. You're welcome to keep attending them, because we do have different residents who attend. And so we are having people specifically going to talk about livelihoods here, I believe at the May session. So if you're interested in the topics around, how do people make a living here? What kind of work are they doing? Do people have cottage industries and businesses? We can talk about that now too, but we'll especially be focusing on it at the May, I believe, 3rd session. Other questions?
So the question is the emotional pain that people are going through, and how do you resolve issues when they come up, when people just, there is a hierarchy, when some person wants to suppress another, because of unprocessed childhood trauma or whatever they have, people want to make other people feel bad in order to get themselves lift up. That's the general trend in the world that I'm seeing. So how does that, that's the core of pain that some of us, experience, and how does that get resolved when other people humiliate other people? Okay.
Let me just reflect your question in the way it makes sense to things here. So it seems like you're pointing towards the fact that we have conflict. People, have times when they're triggered by others, or their behavior, or some way that their needs cannot be met at that time. And how do we here as an Ecovillage living so interdependently deal with that kind of conflict, that kind of interpersonal struggle? Is that it, Alosha? That's what you're curious about?
Yeah, when somebody is bullying, let's be more specific. When somebody is bullying another person.
Okay. Well, interesting. I can talk about something that's actually been an issue here. So we have this interpersonal communication that happens, very verbally and non-verbally between people all the time. And we also have a shared resident-only email list. And we just have we have a list for official notices, and then for the residents. Each neighborhood also has their own list. But this is pretty vital for our communication with each other. And the thing about written email messages, to your point and to your question, is if somebody is charged or upset or feels marginalized or hurt or has an issue, either with their neighborhood or with the village, it's a little bit easier on email. to perhaps express themselves in a way that we could call bullying, or maybe express some hostilities or complaints in a way that I might not speak to you the same, Melissa, like if I just, saw you in the path and wanted to talk to you about what's happening. I think people tend to lose that care and respect of each other more easily through written dialogue than when they're looking at another person face to face. So I would say that most of our issues have been more relating back to that, at least recently, to that resident email listserv that we use. And we have had to talk to people who were, I would say what I consider bullying, what actually happens in reality here, isn't about name calling or belittling people or trying to put them down. It's about generalizing or making assumptions to all people. It's about complaining about something that's not happening without bringing forward an actual request for what that person's seeking. So when those elements are missing and you're only hearing what's hurting in the person, and they're putting it in general terms on the village is doing this to me, or these people are doing this to me, then people start to get defensive and things start to get heated, because that is the feeling of emotional pain that's being expressed without being able to identify what's really happening, who's really being impacted by who, and what's needed in the situation. So a growing edge here, just I think probably in every community, and I'll just say it transparently, is being able to give and receive feedback. We have it in our governance structures, at least in Tree Neighborhood, we use dynamic governance. That's going to be the topic of one of the other question and answer sessions in a few months. So in other words, it's in our intentions and in our cultural procedures that we want to use. But a lot of times that is a very difficult thing for people to do, is to really give honest feedback in a way that is constructive, that isn't hurtful, but names things that aren't working for you and makes clear requests to people. So we've done that. People from this conflict transformation team and other individuals have, and what we tend to do here is we take people aside. First of all, we don't want to write back on that village line like, what are you doing, bullying people on this line, and just feed a lot of people jumping in a heated way on a village line. So we will go and have private conversations with people. We'll talk to people one-on-one. We'll have small groups. We'll use the circle process that I mentioned earlier to actually get people to start to drop out of that more reactive state and back into what they're actually experiencing in a way that we can start to address the real underlying needs or what's important to them there. I hope that's helpful, Alicia.
Yeah, and if, for example, somebody is feeling humiliated by another person, even if it's not openly bullying, like calling names, but you just feel the person says something and it just makes you feel terrible every time. It happens. It happens pretty often. What happens if, but in the community, you have to do some things together. But what if these two people are not like,
Sure.
I feel hurt by somebody, but now I'm forced to do, I don't know what are people forced to do?
I would say
in
in some ways, well, no one's forced to do anything. So we don't have requirements around common meals, that we offer common meals. There's an expectation of 2 to 4 hours of work time, volunteer time. But when you have 100 households and 250 people, you don't necessarily interact with everyone all the time, and you don't have to be best friends with everyone all the time. But kind of what, to your point of, what happens when you run into that person? I think I would flip that and say, because you're going to run into that person, it is more likely you're more motivated to resolve things. Usually, I'm making a little bit of a general statement, but because you don't want to feel confined to your own home, or like you can't move about freely and interact and all these things, people feel more motivated to work these things out and get to a place where everyone can feel comfortable in their home. I saw a couple more hands. Jonathan,
Yeah, thank
go
you.
ahead. Yeah, you're welcome. Jonathan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so I've been visiting the Ecovillage for the past few weeks, and I'm really struck by just how built out and functional it is. And I guess there's a lot, as Corirose mentioned, there's a lot of thousands and thousands of hours put into it. I'm wondering if you could speak to the decision-making process and how it is for people who aren't familiar with the decision-making process, how to sort of learn how to fit into that decision-making process models that are used here.
I'd like to say one thing in general, Jonathan, because so part of the village as a whole uses consensus decision-making. The neighborhoods, the first neighborhood and second neighborhood use consensus decision-making to make their individual neighborhood decisions. And then Tree neighborhood, the third neighborhood where Mark and Pat and myself live, we use dynamic governance, also known as sociocracy. But all of that relies on people, really having a shared decision-making process that is going to involve a lot of alignment and a lot of agreement on how to solidify various kinds of policies or all kinds of decisions that affect our lives. So what I can say is that we take classes, we give talks. They're doing this again in Frog, the first neighborhood. They're really studying again what are the key elements of consensus decision making as a neighborhood to help renew that. But for this session and for this moment, I'd really like to say again that what it really takes to live interdependently and to use these forms of shared decision making is trust. And what it takes to cultivate that kind of trust is really starts with self-connection and self-knowledge, knowing your own values, kind of what's important to you, being able to really listen to that information in other people. And it does require a lot of communication, and it really requires a willingness to have your mind be open, to have your thoughts on a particular topic or subject change, to kind of tune into the group mind. I've had that experience many times. It's quite amazing. I'll have pretty strong view and sense of what's right for something, listen to a go around of 7 or 8 people who are working on a team for this particular policy, and end up with a different thought, really, about what's going to meet the most needs and how it's going to happen. So these communication elements, these underlying elements that help us stay true to ourselves and make the space for others, see what we have in common, and really learn how to not just rub up against each other, but negotiate what we have in common and how that makes the best collective decision. It's not a light thing to do. It takes a lot of intrapersonal skill and interpersonal skill, and I've learned so much really from the people that have been here a long time and doing this. Okay, maybe that's good for now.
Dan, I see you have a question, but I just wanted to check in. Pat and Mark, did you have something you were going to add earlier, or you're good for now? Okay, Dan, why don't we hear your question?
Thank you, guys. A quick question. I was just on the website. So basically the actionable thing, if I wanted to get involved or think of get the full experience, you have to basically book an Airbnb. I saw 2 listed on that website. One, the website, one link to Airbnb and one link to a separate website, but you basically have to shell out 5 nights of rental and experience the experience, and that's kind of the requirement, I guess, before you move to the Ecovillage. Is that right?
Sort of. So we ask people to come here in person for a cumulative 5 days. So those don't have to be 5 consecutive days. You also don't have to stay on property. So sometimes people will find somewhere to stay downtown, or they have friends and family that they find in the area that they stay with. Occasionally there are other homestays that come up available. And as I mentioned, once in a while, if you're a renter, if you're looking to be a renter, sometimes that 5-day stay is fulfilled in that first 30 days that you live here. But the part of the reason that requirement is there is to really make sure it's a good fit, right? And that people understand what we're about, what it's like here, and those kinds of things. So we're not intentionally trying to create financial hardship, but our community doesn't have like a hostel or, you know, a retreat center or dormitory at this time. So we don't have a lot of options to offer in terms of like physical places to stay. One more option I can offer is that we have 3 common houses. Each neighborhood has its own common house with guest rooms. And it is possible to work with the membership committee to potentially stay in one of those guest rooms for a small fee, you know, depending on availability. So we try, and in the summertime too, camping is also an option. We have places where people could camp on site.
Okay. Yeah. So it seems like you just email whoever's listed on the website and kind of just express your kind of like, oh, you're feeling it out. I'm in the feeling it out stage. I'm doing my intention is to do the 5-day, you know, experience and see how I feel after that kind of thing.
Right. So we have a prospective resident committee. So the email contact for them is on the website, and that's a good place to start. And they'll work with you on starting to go through those membership requirements.
So the email for that is on the site. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's on the Living Here, at the bottom of the Living Here page.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing. Crystal, did you have a question too? Yeah, Crystal, go for it. Yeah.
So somebody I think it was Dan that just brought up the Airbnb. How many Airbnbs are there in the Ecovillage, and what process was arrived at to determine, like, you know, how they'll be used? Because I guess anybody could occupy those, so anyone can sort of look it up and come there. You know, sometimes there's been problems with Airbnb. So I was just wondering, you know, what percentage of the units maybe are used as Airbnbs, and was there a process in deciding, you know, the rules around how they'd be used and that kind of thing? Thank you.
Sure. I think I can answer that. From the time there was the first neighborhood, there was one home that had Airbnb in that. It's a fairly small percentage in the first neighborhood. There are a few more in the second neighborhood because they built houses in the second neighborhood that actually had a private space, like in the lower level, with a kitchen and a full bath. So there was actually just more room, more different kind of apartments in the homes that made that possible. And I can think of like just 3 out of the 30 homes in the second neighborhood that have Airbnbs. Like I said, 1 has in the first neighborhood. And my understanding of why it was ever even considered, and it did have to be consented upon by the neighborhood, was because of the expense of living here, you know, of paying for community needs on top of your own individual household expenses, your mortgage or whatever. And it made it possible. We have one neighbor that it's made it possible for him to do his activism and, you know, participate fully with his gifts in the world, to be able to have an Airbnb be a part of their equation for that individual household. So need was a driver, you know, for the actual resident in first bringing that forward. And here in the third neighborhood, for example, we have not agreed to be able to have Airbnbs. The houses, when there's a significant number of household members who really just don't feel comfortable with it, they would really like people to know the people who are coming. Then, even though there might be some people who would like to be able to do that for their own income stream, we're trying sort of a little fusion where you can have someone that you know or friends that you know stay for under 30 days, just to see how that works. But pretty much it's driven by the needs of the people. It's agreed upon by everybody. It's not a high percentage. And there are requests that are made that people announce their guests and, you know, who they are, and so that we have a sense of who's coming and going from the neighborhood. Hope that's helpful.
And it's evolving too, because the Tree neighborhood is looking at short-term rental policy. So, and you know, there have been conversations about absentee landlords and whether that is aligned with, you know, the kind of community we want. So it's not a fixed point, you know, it's a conversation that is ongoing. We're about out of time, so I will encourage folks to, I'm going to put up a slide with my contact information and information about things that are coming up. And I encourage you to contact me directly if you have further questions. And or also attend future events. As I mentioned, these are monthly. Let me go ahead and share my screen and bring up the slide with those opportunities. So Corirose, are you all able to see this?
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
So this is my email address, ccameron@thriveithaca.org. Upcoming, as I mentioned, Corirose has a couple of introductory workshops about communication on the 19th and the 22nd, and then also a 5-week course. So please go to our website to sign up for those and find out more there. We also have in-person things going on. So we have a lot of tours every month. And we also are offering monthly forest therapy walks. And the next Q&A session will be on April 5th. That's going to be focused on aging in community. We have a couple of residents, including Mark, who are going to talk about that experience here. These are always on the first Wednesday at noon online and by donation. So to register for that, go to the Thrive website. And yeah, there are different ways to stay in touch with us. We also have a couple of social accounts. You can subscribe to our newsletter to get email updates about things, about opportunities, about other programs, about things happening here in person. And I'll just say once more, feel free to contact me directly. So my role is education and outreach. So I really am one of the people here that is kind of the interface between the village and folks like you who are interested in what's going on here.